They say every choice we make leaves a mark, like ripples across the surface of still water. Most fade quickly, lost to the wind, but some reach farther than we could ever imagine, touching lives we'll never meet, changing hearts we'll never know, and shaping stories we'll never hear. Sometimes those ripples begin with something so small, so quiet, it almost goes unseen. A moment of hesitation at a checkout line, a stranger's smile, a decision to help when no one's watching. These are the invisible threads of the human story, and every once in a while, they weave something extraordinary. Because every act of kindness, no matter how small, carries within it the power to rewrite someone's tomorrow. Not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through the quiet, steady grace of being seen when the world has forgotten how to look. Before we begin tonight's story, take a moment. Hit subscribe, and in the comments below, share the name of your city or town. Let's see how far this story travels, how many ripples it can create. Now, sit back, take a breath, and imagine the faint hum of a grocery store on a rainy Thursday morning. A woman, tired and distracted, counts the few dollars left in her purse. A man, standing a few feet away, notices something most people wouldn't. And in that instant, the first ripple begins. The checkout light flickered softly above lane 6. Sarah stood there, her hair damp from the drizzle outside, clutching a basket filled mostly with essentials: milk, bread, rice, and a small box of cereal her son had asked for 3 days ago. Her eyes darted between the digital display of the register and the crumpled bills in her palm. It wasn't that she hadn't budgeted. She had, as always, but life had a way of bending numbers until they broke. Rent was due tomorrow, the power bill overdue by 2 weeks, and her son Ethan had outgrown his shoes again. She could feel the sting of exhaustion not just in her body, but deep in her chest, that dull ache of holding it together for too long. Behind her, the line grew restless, a sigh here, a shuffle there. Sarah forced a smile to the cashier, a young girl who looked barely old enough to understand the price of worry. "I'm sorry," Sarah murmured, counting coins now, whispering numbers under her breath. It wasn't embarrassment she felt. It was defeat. That quiet, familiar kind of defeat that comes from realizing you've done everything right and it's still not enough. Across the store, near the coffee aisle, Michael watched. He hadn't meant to notice her. He was just there for his usual, a bag of dark roast and some sugar. But something about her posture stopped him. Not the way she stood, but the way she didn't. Like a tree that had been through too many storms. Still standing, but barely. Michael was in his mid-30s, with the kind of face that held kindness in its quiet lines. He'd spent the last decade learning that sometimes the most important things in life were the ones no one ever saw. Years ago, when he was at his lowest, someone had done something for him, something small, but life-changing. He'd never forgotten it, and every now and then, he tried to pass it forward. He took a slow breath, pretending to browse. From where he stood, he could see Sarah's hands trembling as she searched for one more dollar. The cashier smiled politely, trying to hide the discomfort of watching someone come up short. Michael's heart tightened. He remembered that feeling, the shame that shouldn't exist, but does. He turned, walked quietly to the customer service counter, and said something softly to the clerk. A few minutes later, the intercom buzzed with the dull sound of a store announcement. Nothing dramatic, just an invisible act slipping into motion. By the time Sarah reached for her bag to put a few items back, the cashier blinked at her screen and said, "After dropping Ethan off at school, she drove in silence. The city stretched around her like a tired old friend. The same cracked sidewalks, the same weary faces at the bus stops. But she saw it differently today. The stranger's act had done more than pay for groceries. It had awakened a part of her that had gone quiet long ago, the part that believed good things could still happen. She caught her reflection in the rearview mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she looked different. She still had the same lines, the same dark circles, but because for once, her eyes weren't filled with resignation. They were alive, curious, maybe even hopeful. Across town, Michael's morning was less poetic. He moved through his small apartment with the rhythm of habit. Brew coffee, feed the cat, check the list on the fridge that never seemed to shrink. He wasn't a man given to routine out of comfort. It was how he kept the world predictable, manageable. After years of uncertainty, it was easier to live by quiet structure. Yet today, something tugged at him, that same subtle awareness that follows after doing something meaningful. Not pride, never that, just a kind of peace. The knowledge that he'd nudged the universe slightly toward the good. And that was enough. Michael worked at a local print shop, a modest place on the corner of Maple and Ninth. Most days were quiet, the hum of machines, the faint smell of ink, the monotony of orders. But the shop gave him something to do, a way to stay grounded after years of drifting through grief and memory. There was a time he'd been an artist, once upon a younger, braver version of himself. He'd painted cityscapes, wrote poetry and margins, but after his father's passing and the slow unraveling of his marriage, art had become too heavy to carry. Now, his creativity lived only in small gestures, a note left on a coworker's desk, a coffee paid forward, a quiet word of kindness. He didn't tell anyone about what he did at the store yesterday. Some things lost meaning when spoken aloud. Better to let them live quietly, like prayer. That afternoon, Sarah left work early. The rain had stopped, replaced by that clean, glistening air that follows a storm. She stopped at a red light, and for a moment she just breathed. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd simply allowed herself to stop and exist without rushing to the next worry. At the corner, an old man struggled with a paper bag, groceries spilling onto the wet sidewalk. Without thinking, she pulled over, jumped out, and knelt beside him. "Here, let me help," she said, gathering the cans before they rolled away. The man smiled, a slow, grateful expression that revealed the years etched across his face. "Thank you, miss," he said. "These hands aren't as steady as they used to be." She returned the smile. "It's all right. Happens to all of us." When she helped him to his feet, he introduced himself, softly. "Mr. Chen." He lived just a few blocks down, in one of the old brick buildings Sarah passed daily but never noticed. She offered to carry the rest of his groceries home, and he accepted with the humble politeness of someone not used to being helped. Inside his small apartment, she saw walls lined with books and faded photographs. A cat slept on an old armchair. Everything smelt faintly of tea and time. "You live alone?" she asked, setting the bags down on the counter. He nodded. "My wife passed 10 years ago. My son's overseas, but it's all right. I have my stories to keep me company." Something in that line stayed with her. Stories to keep me company. When she left, she promised she'd stop by again to check on him. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she meant it. That evening, Sarah cooked dinner with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Ethan noticed. "You're happy, Mom," he said between bites of pasta. She smiled. "Yeah, I think I am." He grinned back, the kind of grin that could fill a room. Can we save some for tomorrow? For that old man you helped?" Her heart warmed. "Yeah," she said softly, "we can." Days turned to weeks. Sarah began visiting Mr. Chen regularly, sometimes with Ethan in tow. They'd bring a bit of food, share stories, or just sit in the calm of his small kitchen as he told tales from his youth. Stories about ships, lost loves, and the small joys that make up a lifetime. In helping him, Sarah didn't just find purpose, she found peace. It was as though Michael's quiet gesture had lit a chain of candles, one kindness leading to another, pushing back the shadows in corners she hadn't realized had grown dark. Meanwhile, Michael carried on with his own quiet rhythm. He never saw Sarah again, not yet, but sometimes he thought about the woman at the register, wondered if she'd been okay. And in those moments, he'd feel that same warmth rise in him, like a reminder that he'd done something that mattered, even if no one knew. On Sundays, he'd walk through the park near his apartment, a ritual inherited from his father. The same path, the same bench, the same view of the lake. He found peace in the stillness. Sometimes he'd buy an extra coffee and leave it on the bench beside him, for whoever came next, a quiet tradition. Sarah's world continued to shift in quiet ways. Her confidence grew, her laughter came easier. Ethan began to notice too. He told his teacher about the kind stranger who bought them groceries. The teacher shared it with the class, and suddenly a simple act had become a seed of stories passed from one person to another. But the most profound change was the one Sarah didn't yet see. The way her kindness toward Mr. Chen was starting to give him a reason to live again. For years, he'd moved through his days like a ghost in his own home, eating alone, speaking to no one. But Sarah's visits had cracked open a door to joy he thought had long closed. He began writing again, letters to his son, journal entries about his youth, reflections about kindness. He even began leaving small notes on his doorstep for the mailman. Little affirmations like, "You matter," or "Thank you for what you do." Tiny gestures, almost invisible, but they carried weight. And so the ripples continued, from Michael to Sarah, from Sarah to Mr. Chen, and from Mr. Chen to anyone lucky enough to cross his quiet orbit, each act feeding the next, like an unbroken chain of grace. One evening, as Sarah prepared to leave Mr. Chen's apartment, he stopped her at the door. "You know," he said, smiling, "people think kindness is like rain. It falls once and disappears, but really it's more like sunlight. You can't always see where it goes, but it keeps everything alive." Sarah nodded, holding back a tear. "I think you're right," she said softly. As she walked home through the fading light, she thought about how one small act, one unseen moment had led her here, to this street, this purpose, this peace. Michael sat by his window that same night, unaware of the chain he'd started. He looked out over the city lights and whispered, "Thank you," not knowing exactly who he was thanking. Maybe the woman he helped, maybe the stranger who once helped him, maybe life itself, for letting him give something back.
Outside, the wind carried both whispers into the same night sky. And somewhere between those invisible threads of gratitude, the world shifted again, just a little. Sarah fell asleep beside Ethan, the boy's small hand resting on hers. She dreamed of rain turning into light, of faces she hadn't met, smiling because of choices she didn't even know she'd made. And far away, Michael dreamed too, of peace, of connection, of a kindness that would keep echoing long after he was gone. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones we tell, they're the ones we live, without even realizing it. Time has a strange way of softening pain when kindness begins to fill the empty spaces. Weeks became months, and though the world around Sarah remained unpredictable, rent still due, bills still climbing, something inside her had steadied. Each day no longer felt like survival. It began to feel like living again. Mornings found her humming while packing Ethan's lunch. Afternoons were spent working longer hours at the diner, but now, instead of counting tips with dread, she counted them with gratitude. Every dollar, every shift, a reminder she was still moving forward. And every Thursday evening she visited Mr. Chen. Sometimes they shared dinner, sometimes silence, but always there was peace. He'd tell her about his late wife, May, how she'd loved jasmine tea and old poetry, and how the world had felt dimmer since she was gone. She would listen, not out of pity, but connection. She knew what it meant to lose someone who once gave color to your world. For her, it was her marriage. Not death, but absence, a hollow kind of loss that lingers like smoke. But through these quiet evenings, Sarah began to realize something profound. The heart heals not through forgetting pain, but by giving love somewhere new to land. One afternoon she brought Ethan along again. Mr. Chen had baked cookies, the uneven, handmade kind that taste of care rather than perfection. Ethan giggled at his stories, especially the ones about his childhood in Shanghai, about paper kites and summer rainstorms. That laughter, the sound of generations bridging over sugar and tea, filled the old apartment with something it hadn't known in years: life. And for a moment it didn't matter who they were or what they'd lost. They were family, in the way that kindness makes strangers kin. Later that evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Sarah found herself thinking about Michael again, though she didn't know his name. The mystery of that unseen giver lingered like a question in her heart. Did he know what he'd set in motion? Would he ever feel the echo of what he'd done? She imagined what she'd say if she ever met him. Thank you felt too small. Maybe she'd simply tell him the truth. You changed me. Across town, Michael sat at his usual bench in the park. The air was cool, laced with the first touch of autumn. Leaves whispered secrets overhead as he took a sip of coffee and watched people move, each person wrapped in their own quiet battle. He often wondered if small acts could really matter in a world that seemed to feed on noise and indifference. But then he'd remember the woman at the grocery store, her trembling hands, her quiet gratitude, and he'd know the answer. Yes, they mattered. Because that was how light traveled, quietly, but endlessly. That day he noticed a little girl feeding pigeons near the fountain. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her mother sat nearby, scrolling her phone, unaware of how gently her daughter was caring for the fragile creatures around her. Michael smiled faintly, a small reminder that innocence still existed in the simplest gestures. As he got up to leave, he dropped a folded $20 bill near the girl's bucket of crumbs, pretending it had fallen by accident. She gasped, ran to return it, but he waved her off with a grin. "Buy more bread," he said softly. "They look hungry." Her mother looked up startled and smiled shyly. Michael walked away without another word. He didn't realize that in doing so, he'd just created another ripple, one that would reach back to him in time, through people he'd never meet. Meanwhile, Mr. Chen's health began to waver. Nothing sudden, just the slow fatigue of years catching up. He brushed it off, joking that his knees had started to sound like an old rocking chair. But Sarah noticed the tremor in his hands, the shortness of breath when he climbed the stairs. She insisted on helping more: grocery trips, doctor visits, even organizing his medication.
He resisted at first, pride holding him back, but eventually he relented. "You're stubborn," he told her one day, smiling. She grinned. "So are you." And from that moment, something unspoken bound them together. Not obligation, but care. In helping him, she found her strength again. And in being helped, he found dignity reborn. At night, when the city quieted, Sarah began writing in a small notebook she kept by her bedside. Not a diary, she'd never liked that word, but reflections, moments of kindness she'd witnessed that day, no matter how small. A smile from a stranger, a coworker covering her shift, a child sharing crayons at Ethan's school. She called it the Ripple Journal. Page by page, it became proof that goodness wasn't as rare as people thought. You just had to look closer. Michael had started writing again, too. Not art or poetry like before, just letters to no one. He'd fill them with thoughts about life, gratitude, and the quiet beauty of unnoticed moments. Then he'd fold them and leave them tucked in library books, park benches, and coffee shop tables. Anonymous kindness set loose in the world. If Sarah's journal was a record of ripples, Michael's letters were the waves themselves, both unaware that their small, separate worlds were moving toward each other again, destined to cross once more. Ethan's school hosted a fall festival that year. There were pumpkins, small games, and a raffle table near the entrance. Sarah volunteered, helping to set up decorations while keeping an eye on Ethan's laughter from across the field. Mr. Chen had insisted on coming too, wrapped in his warm coat, walking cane in hand. He moved slowly, but smiled the entire way. When he saw the children running, he chuckled. That's what joy looks like when it forgets to grow old. At the raffle table, Michael appeared. He hadn't planned on attending. His coworker had given him a few tickets left over from the print shop's donation. It was the first community event he'd been to in years. He felt out of place, but stayed anyway.
He stopped to buy a cup of cider, and that's when his eyes caught Sarah. He didn't recognize her at first, not right away. There was something radiant about her now. The same woman, but lighter somehow, as if she'd found her way out of the storm. She laughed with Mr. Chen and Ethan, handing out ribbons to children who'd won small prizes. The joy in her movements, the warmth in her eyes, it was unmistakable. Michael froze for a heartbeat, realization dawning slowly. Could it be her? The woman from the store that rainy afternoon? He didn't move closer, didn't interrupt. He just stood there, watching. Something inside him eased. He didn't need thanks or recognition. This was enough. To see the ripple alive, still moving, still bright. He smiled faintly, tucked his hands into his jacket, and turned to leave. Before he could, a small voice called out, "Hey, you dropped something." Ethan ran toward him, holding out a chicken stub. Michael chuckled. "No, I think that's yours, buddy." The boy grinned. "You sure?" "Yeah," Michael said. "Keep it. Might be lucky." Ethan smiled wide. "Thanks." As he ran back to Sarah, Michael caught her glance for a split second. She smiled politely, not knowing, not remembering. But somehow, that was perfect. The act remained unseen, as it was meant to. That night, when Ethan checked his ticket, he'd won a small prize, a gift card to the local grocery store. Sarah laughed at the coincidence, unaware that the universe had just winked back at her. For Michael, that fleeting moment, that glimpse of her joy, stayed with him for weeks. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't need to. He just carried it quietly, like a secret he was meant to keep. And so the months rolled on, gentle as falling leaves. Sarah's ripple journal thickened. Mr. Chen's health wavered, but his spirit grew stronger.
Michael's letters multiplied, spreading through the city like seeds on the wind. Until one cold evening, when everything changed again. Sarah was driving home from work when her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. It was the neighbor from Mr. Chen's building. Her voice trembled. "He fell. The ambulance just took him. They're heading to St. Mary's." Sarah's heart sank. She drove through the night rain, hands tight on the wheel, memories flashing like headlights. His smile, his stories, his cookies. The thought of losing him felt unbearable. At the hospital, she found him awake but weak. Tubes and monitors surrounded his frail body. When he saw her, he smiled faintly. "Ah, my stubborn friend. I told you these old bones were unreliable." She laughed through tears. "You scared me." "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Didn't mean to make you worry." The doctor said he'd be okay, but he'd need rest and assistance. Sarah promised to check on him daily. And she did. Every morning before work, every night before bed, she made sure he had food, water, warmth, and company. In those quiet hours, sitting beside him as the machines hummed, she thought again of that day at the grocery store and how one stranger's kindness had led her here. Not to riches or perfection, but to meaning. Mr. Chen held her hand one night, his voice thin but steady. "You know, Sarah, the best way to thank someone for kindness is to give it away." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I think I already have." He smiled, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who's lived a full circle. "Then you've understood everything." Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season. It blanketed the city in silence, soft as forgiveness. And somewhere across town, Michael stood by his window, watching that same snow. He thought about how peaceful it looked, how fleeting, yet how beautiful. Each flake unique, yet all falling together. Kinda like people, he thought. He smiled faintly, unaware that his unseen act months ago was still echoing, saving lives, mending hearts, reminding the world to be kind.
But fate wasn't done weaving their stories together just yet, because soon their paths would cross again, not by coincidence, but by grace. The snow lingered longer that year, draping the city in white silence. For Sarah, the cold mornings became routine. Coffee, coat, car, hospital. Her visits to Mr. Chen were steady as heartbeat. She brought him soup, books, stories from the diner, pictures Ethan drew. In those quiet hospital rooms, between beeps and whispers, they learned the sacred weight of ordinary days. Ethan came sometimes too, sitting by the window coloring while the old man watched with tender amusement. "Your boy has a good heart," Mr. Chen told her. She smiled. "He gets it from strangers." The old man chuckled, eyes soft. "Then strangers have done something holy." Weeks passed. Mr. Chen's health wavered like a candle in the wind, strong one moment, dim the next. But Sarah stayed. Through the long nights and the early dawns, she stayed. What began as gratitude had become love, not romantic, but the deeper kind that binds souls across generations. Outside the hospital, life went on. Cars, traffic, chatter. Michael passed that same hospital every morning on his way to work, never knowing the connection it held. He'd look up at the gray building sometimes, thinking about all the stories happening behind those windows. So many lives colliding quietly, unseen. One afternoon, a blizzard rolled in. Snow thickened, roads closed, the world slowed to a hush. Sarah stayed late at the diner because her coworker couldn't make it through the storm. By the time she left, the sky was already a blur of white. She hesitated before heading to the hospital. The roads looked dangerous, but her heart told her to go. She couldn't bear the thought of Mr. Chen alone in the storm.
The drive was slow, every street a maze of snow and flashing lights. When she finally reached St. Mary's, she hurried through the frozen parking lot, her boots crunching against the ice. Inside, the halls were dim, the staff thinned by weather. She found Mr. Chen asleep, frail but peaceful. She pulled up a chair and took his hand. "Hey, old friend," she whispered. "It's just snow. We'll wait it out together." He stirred slightly, his fingers tightening around hers. "Still stubborn," he murmured, half dreaming. "Always," she said, smiling through tears. Hours passed in stillness. The storm howled outside, the world reduced to two people sharing warmth in the dark. Sarah must have dozed off, because when she opened her eyes, the monitors were flashing. The steady beep had turned erratic. Her breath caught. "Mr. Chen?" Nurses rushed in, voices calm but urgent. Sarah stepped back, heart racing. "Please," she whispered, hands trembling, "please stay." Minutes stretched like hours. Then the doctor exhaled. "He's stable. We got him back." Sarah leaned against the wall, tears spilling freely. Relief, gratitude, exhaustion, all flooding at once. When she returned to his bedside, his eyes were open, faint but clear. "I told you," he said, voice hoarse. "I'm not going anywhere yet." She laughed through sobs. "You scared me to death." He smiled weakly. "You were my reason to hold on, you know." She took his hand again, squeezing gently. "And you were mine," she whispered. Outside the window, dawn was breaking, pink light spilling across the snow. A new day, a new chance. That morning, Sarah decided something. She would make sure Mr. Chen's life meant more than a name on a hospital chart. She'd tell his stories, share his words, keep his light alive. Kindness shouldn't fade when people do. It should echo. Over the next few weeks, she started a small blog, the Ripple Journal, named after her notebook. Each post shared a simple act of kindness, a neighbor's smile, a nurse's patience, a stranger's generosity. She didn't write for fame or attention. She wrote because she needed people to remember that goodness still existed. It began quietly, a few readers, some friends. Then one post changed everything. "The man who paid for my groceries." She wrote about that day, the rain, the relief, the kindness that started it all. She didn't name him because she never knew who he was, but she thanked him from the deepest part of her heart. She ended it simply. "If you ever hear this, know that your unseen act became a chain of miracles." Within days, the story spread. People shared it across social media, comments flooding in from around the world. Thousands wrote about their own ripples, acts given, acts received. It became a quiet movement, a reminder that empathy still had a pulse. Michael stumbled upon it one evening, scrolling through headlines while sipping tea. He wasn't looking for anything. He almost skipped past it. But the words, "a stranger who paid for my groceries," caught his eye. He froze. His heart knew before his mind did. He clicked the link. As he read, time folded. The rain, the trembling hands, the quiet relief all rushing back. Line by line, he felt his chest tighten. This was her, the woman from Lane 6. He leaned back in his chair, breath shallow. He'd never wanted credit, never wanted thanks, but seeing what had grown from that one simple act left him speechless. Her words were beautiful, but what struck him most wasn't the gratitude. It was the transformation. She'd built a bridge of light from one moment of mercy. He closed his eyes, whispering to no one. "You did it. You kept it going." For the first time in years, tears slipped down his cheeks. Quiet, cleansing tears. The next morning, he walked to his favorite park bench with 2 coffees instead of 1. He set one beside him and sat in silence. He imagined Sarah and her son somewhere across the city, smiling, living. And he felt something rare and sacred, peace that didn't need recognition. But fate wasn't done weaving their stories together just yet.
because soon their paths would cross again, not by coincidence, but by grace. The snow lingered longer that year, draping the city in white silence. For Sarah, the cold mornings became routine. Coffee, coat, car, hospital. Her visits to Mr. Chen were steady as heartbeat. She brought him soup, books, stories from the diner, pictures Ethan drew. In those quiet hospital rooms, between beeps and whispers, they learned the sacred weight of ordinary days. Ethan came sometimes too, sitting by the window coloring while the old man watched with tender amusement. "Your boy has a good heart," Mr. Chen told her. She smiled. "He gets it from strangers." The old man chuckled, eyes soft. "Then strangers have done something holy." Weeks passed. Mr. Chen's health wavered like a candle in the wind, strong one moment, dim the next. But Sarah stayed. Through the long nights and the early dawns, she stayed. What began as gratitude had become love, not romantic, but the deeper kind that binds souls across generations. Outside the hospital, life went on. Cars, traffic, chatter. Michael passed that same hospital every morning on his way to work, never knowing the connection it held. He'd look up at the gray building sometimes, thinking about all the stories happening behind those windows. So many lives colliding quietly, unseen. One afternoon, a blizzard rolled in. Snow thickened, roads closed, the world slowed to a hush. Sarah stayed late at the diner because her coworker couldn't make it through the storm. By the time she left, the sky was already a blur of white. She hesitated before heading to the hospital. The roads looked dangerous, but her heart told her to go. She couldn't bear the thought of Mr. Chen alone in the storm. The drive was slow, every street a maze of snow and flashing lights. When she finally reached St. Mary's, she hurried through the frozen parking lot, her boots crunching against the ice. Inside, the halls were dim, the staff thinned by weather. She found Mr. Chen asleep, frail but peaceful. She pulled up a chair and took his hand. "Hey, old friend," she whispered. "It's just snow. We'll wait it out together." He stirred slightly, his fingers tightening around hers. "Still stubborn," he murmured, half dreaming. "Always," she said, smiling through tears. Hours passed in stillness. The storm howled outside, the world reduced to two people sharing warmth in the dark. Sarah must have dozed off, because when she opened her eyes, the monitors were flashing. The steady beep had turned erratic. Her breath caught. "Mr. Chen?" Nurses rushed in, voices calm but urgent. Sarah stepped back, heart racing. "Please," she whispered, hands trembling, "please stay." Minutes stretched like hours. Then the doctor exhaled. "He's stable. We got him back." Sarah leaned against the wall, tears spilling freely. Relief, gratitude, exhaustion, all flooding at once. When she returned to his bedside, his eyes were open, faint but clear. "I told you," he said, voice hoarse. "I'm not going anywhere yet." She laughed through sobs. "You scared me to death." He smiled weakly. "You were my reason to hold on, you know." She took his hand again, squeezing gently. "And you were mine," she whispered. Outside the window, dawn was breaking, pink light spilling across the snow. A new day, a new chance. That morning, Sarah decided something. She would make sure Mr. Chen's life meant more than a name on a hospital chart. She'd tell his stories, share his words, keep his light alive. Kindness shouldn't fade when people do. It should echo. Over the next few weeks, she started a small blog, the Ripple Journal, named after her notebook. Each post shared a simple act of kindness, a neighbor's smile, a nurse's patience, a stranger's generosity. She didn't write for fame or attention. She wrote because she needed people to remember that goodness still existed. It began quietly, a few readers, some friends. Then one post changed everything. "The man who paid for my groceries." She wrote about that day, the rain, the relief, the kindness that started it all. She didn't name him because she never knew who he was.
But she thanked him from the deepest part of her heart. She ended it simply. If you ever hear this, know that your unseen act became a chain of miracles. Within days, the story spread. People shared it across social media, comments flooding in from around the world. Thousands wrote about their own ripples, acts given, acts received. It became a quiet movement, a reminder that empathy still had a pulse. Michael stumbled upon it one evening, scrolling through headlines while sipping tea. He wasn't looking for anything. He almost skipped past it. But the words, "a stranger who paid for my groceries," caught his eye. He froze. His heart knew before his mind did. He clicked the link. As he read, time folded. The rain, the trembling hands, the quiet relief all rushing back. Line by line, he felt his chest tighten. This was her, the woman from Lane 6. He leaned back in his chair, breath shallow. He'd never wanted credit, never wanted thanks, but seeing what had grown from that one simple act left him speechless. Her words were beautiful, but what struck him most wasn't the gratitude. It was the transformation. She'd built a bridge of light from one moment of mercy. He closed his eyes, whispering to no one, "You did it. You kept it going." For the first time in years, tears slipped down his cheeks. Quiet, cleansing tears. The next morning, he walked to his favorite park bench with 2 coffees instead of 1. He set one beside him and sat in silence. He imagined Sarah and her son somewhere across the city, smiling, living. And he felt something rare and sacred, peace that didn't need recognition. Across town, Sarah was visiting Mr. Chen again, reading him the article's comments aloud. She grinned. "You've gone viral, Mr. Chen." He chuckled softly. "I don't know what that means, but I'll assume it's good. It means people are listening. You said kindness was sunlight. Looks like you were right." He smiled, closing his eyes. "Then promise me something. Anything. Keep shining it forward. Don't let it stop with me. I promise." For a while, he said nothing more. His breathing slowed, even, calm. Sarah sat quietly, holding his hand. Moments passed. Then the monitors fell into a steady, endless tone. She froze. Nurses rushed in. But she knew. He was gone. Not suddenly, not violently, just gently, like a candle finally allowed to rest. Tears came, but not of despair. They were tears of gratitude, for having known him, for having loved him, for having lived in the wake of kindness. Days later, at the small memorial service, Sarah read aloud from her Ripple journal. "Every act of compassion is a thread in the unseen fabric of humanity. We don't know where it begins or ends, only that it holds us when we fall." The room was silent. Even strangers cried. Michael stood at the back of the crowd. He hadn't planned to attend. He'd recognized her picture from her blog and saw the notice online. He stayed hidden among the mourners, hat low, heart full. As she spoke, her voice wavered but didn't break. And when she said, "Kindness gave me back my life," he finally understood the full circle. After the service, Sarah walked outside, standing by the snow-dusted steps. Michael lingered a few paces away, wanting to say something, anything, but words felt too small. He turned to leave. Then Ethan saw him. "Hey, I know you," the boy said. Michael turned, startled. The child smiled. "You're the man from the festival, the lucky ticket guy." Michael laughed softly. "Yeah, guess I am." Sarah joined them, smiling faintly. "Hi, we met briefly, didn't we?" He nodded. "Yeah, small world." She sighed, glancing back at the church. "It really is." There was a quiet moment, heavy with something unspoken. Michael wanted to tell her everything, that it was him, that he'd been there that day at the grocery store. But he didn't. He just said, "I read your story. It's beautiful." She smiled softly. "Thank you. It's not really mine, though. It belongs to everyone who believes the world can still be kind." He nodded. "Then keep telling it. The world needs it." She tilted her head, something familiar in his eyes tugging at her. But before she could speak, he tipped his hat and walked away into the falling snow. She watched him go,
That calm walk, that quiet air, and something in her heart whispered a truth she couldn't quite name. She didn't chase it, she just let it be. Sometimes recognition ruins grace. That night she wrote again. Not for the blog this time, just for herself. She wrote, "Kindness doesn't ask for a name, it just wants to keep moving." Her words would later inspire thousands, teachers sharing them in classrooms, volunteers printing them on posters, strangers leaving them on park benches beside free cups of coffee. The ripple had become a wave. Michael watched from a distance, quietly proud. He still wrote his letters, still left them where strangers might find them. But now, when he did, he thought of her, of the way a single act had blossomed into a movement. He'd never tell anyone it started with him. That wasn't the point. Weeks turned to months. The city thawed, winter giving way to spring. Flowers pushed through cracks in the pavement, small, stubborn bursts of color against the gray. Life goes on, always. But for those who carry kindness, life doesn't just go on, it grows. Sarah stood one morning at Mr. Chen's old building, helping the landlord box up his belongings. Among the books and teacups, she found an envelope with her name written in shaky handwriting. "I will." She pressed the letter to her heart, whispering, "I will." That evening, she walked to the park near the lake, the same park Michael often visited. She sat on a bench, the letter still in her hand, and closed her eyes. A breeze brushed her hair, carrying the scent of blooming lilac. She whispered into the wind, "Thank you, whoever you are." Unseen behind her, a familiar figure paused at the end of the path, coffee in hand. Michael looked up, saw her sitting there, peaceful, bathed in gold light. He smiled, not out of pride, but reverence. Then he turned and kept walking, leaving her moment untouched. And somewhere, in that shared silence, between two souls connected by grace, the world exhaled.
Kindness had done its work. The circle was complete. The world never announces when something ends. It doesn't ring a bell or draw a curtain. It just changes, softly, quietly, like winter yielding to spring. Sarah didn't realize how much she changed until one morning she found herself smiling at the mirror for no reason. The lines around her eyes were still there. The world was still imperfect. But she wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. Kindness had rebuilt her, not with money, not with miracles, but with moments. And that, she realized, was how healing truly worked, one unseen act at a time. Ethan was growing fast. His laughter filled the apartment, chasing away echoes of the years that had once been heavy. He was still young, but already Sarah saw something in him, an instinct to help, to comfort, to give. He learned it not from lectures or books, but from watching her. The ripple continued. One morning, on his way to school, Ethan stopped to help a classmate pick up scattered papers from the sidewalk. A small thing, a moment no one else noticed. But Sarah, watching from across the street, felt her chest swell with quiet pride. Because she understood now, that's how kindness travels, from hand to hand, heart to heart. Meanwhile, across the city, Michael sat in his favorite cafe reading the newspaper. His coffee had gone cold, but he didn't mind. He was lost in thought, not about the past, not even about Sarah, but about the quiet miracle of cause and effect. How one gesture had rippled across lives he'd never truly know. He often wondered if the woman from the store still thought of that day. He hoped she didn't think of him, but of what the act represented, proof that the world could still be gentle. He smiled faintly. That was enough. Every Saturday now, he volunteered at a small shelter downtown. Nothing grand, serving soup, folding blankets, listening to stories. It grounded him, reminded him that goodness wasn't rare. It was just quiet. You had to listen closely to hear it. One evening, as he was locking up, a young volunteer approached him. "Hey, Mr. Reed," she said, his name finally spoken aloud. "I read something online today about paying it forward, about a woman and an old man and some groceries. Thought you'd like it." He smiled. "Yeah, I've heard it." She nodded. "It's beautiful. Makes you believe in people again. He looked at her, eyes warm. You should always believe in people. They surprise you. Sarah's blog had continued to grow. What started as a personal journal became a small movement, the Ripple Project. Volunteers across the country began sharing their own acts, documenting them online, tagging it simply, #TheUnseenAct. It wasn't fame she wanted, it was faith, proof that compassion could be contagious. At first, she tried to read every message, every comment, but soon there were too many, hundreds, then thousands. Stories from strangers thanking her for reminding them that kindness mattered. She cried often, not from sadness, but awe. Mr. Chen's old apartment became a small community library, funded by donations from her readers. On its walls hung one of his favorite sayings, hand-painted by Ethan. Kindness is sunlight. You can't always see where it goes, but it keeps everything alive. On the opening day, the neighborhood gathered. Sarah spoke briefly, her voice steady but soft. This place exists because one stranger reminded me that compassion still has power. We're here to make sure that power never fades. Michael stood among the crowd again, unseen, unintroduced, hands in his coat pockets. He watched the ribbon cut, the smiles, the laughter. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to. He was exactly where he belonged, in the quiet, watching good things grow. As the crowd dispersed, Ethan ran by holding a balloon, chasing another child. Michael smiled and turned to leave. And for the briefest moment, Sarah looked up, her gaze brushing past him like a spark of déjà vu. Their eyes met, a heartbeat, nothing more. Then the moment passed, but it lingered, like the last note of a song fading into silence. That night, Sarah sat by her window, watching the city lights blink below. She opened her laptop and began typing again. Not a blog post, not a story, just a reflection. She wrote, "I used to think kindness was a gesture, a moment you give away. But now I know it's more than that. It's a language, a current, an invisible bridge between souls who may never meet, but still change each other's lives. It's proof that love doesn't always need to be seen to be real." She stopped typing, looked up at the night sky, and smiled. Somewhere out there, someone had once seen her in her moment of despair, and without knowing her name, had chosen grace. She didn't need to find him. Some things are more beautiful when left unknown. Months later, the Ripple Project received a national spotlight. News outlets featured her story. People across cities began organizing community kindness events. Children in schools wrote essays about invisible heroes. Even the diner where she worked held a Pay It Forward Friday. But through it all, Sarah stayed humble. Whenever someone thanked her, she simply said, "Don't thank me. Thank the stranger who reminded me to hope." One afternoon, she visited the park again, Mr. Chen's letter in her purse as always. She sat on the same bench, watching people pass, mothers, workers, joggers, the tapestry of a living city. She thought of how many unseen stories were unfolding at that very moment. Across the lake, Michael sat reading, unaware of her presence. He looked up briefly, as if feeling something, a familiar warmth, a quiet pulse in the air. He smiled to himself and whispered, "It never ends."
And maybe it didn't. Maybe that was the point, that kindness doesn't vanish, it just changes hands. As twilight fell, Sarah wrote one last entry in her Ripple journal. Kindness doesn't need to be grand to be eternal. Every small act, every gentle word, every quiet mercy is proof that love leaves a trail, invisible but everlasting. Years passed. Ethan grew into a young man, his heart shaped by his mother's example. He carried the same quiet kindness wherever he went, helping classmates, volunteering, smiling at strangers who looked like they needed to be seen. He never knew the full story behind it all, not until one summer evening. He found the old Ripple journal tucked in a box of his mother's things. The pages were yellowed, the ink fading, but the words glowed. He read every entry, every reflection. And when he reached the first story, about the grocery store, the stranger, and the gift, he felt tears rise. He turned the page and found something new, a letter in his mother's handwriting. For whoever reads this next, remember, the world changes when we choose to care, even when no one is watching. Ethan smiled, whispering, "I will, Mom." And in that whisper, the chain began again. Michael, now older, walked slower, his hair touched with gray. He no longer wrote letters as often, but every once in a while, he'd leave a folded note somewhere, a bench, a shelf, a stranger's pocket. Each one said something simple: "You matter. Keep going." One morning, as he walked through the park, he saw a group of children planting flowers near the path. Their teacher was telling them about kindness. He paused to listen. And when he heard her mention the Ripple Project, he smiled, soft, knowing, proud. He approached the teacher, asked if he could help water the new plants. She handed him a can, smiling. He bent down, his joints aching but heart full, and whispered to the flowers, "Grow well, little ones. You've got light all around you." Later that evening, as he walked home, the sky glowed with that tender gold only spring evenings carry. He thought about all the lives that had brushed his own, faces seen, faces unseen. And he realized it was never about who gave or who received. It was about the current that kept flowing between them. Sarah's blog had long since become a foundation, volunteers, programs, scholarships in Mr. Chen's name. But she stayed behind the scenes, never chasing recognition. Her joy came from watching others carry it forward. Sometimes she'd still think about that day in the store, the hum of the register, the rain on the windows, the kindness that changed everything. And she'd whisper a quiet prayer into the air. "Wherever you are, thank you." Michael never heard it, but maybe he didn't need to. Some things are understood without sound. Years later, when he passed peacefully in his sleep, a folded note was found on his bedside table. It read, "If love is remembered, it was never lost. If kindness continues, it was never wasted." At his small memorial, the pastor read those words aloud. And among the attendees was a woman in her 50s, Sarah, standing quietly near the back, tears in her eyes but peace in her heart. She didn't know how she knew, but she knew. The circle had closed. After the service, she walked outside, the air crisp and clear. She lifted her face to the sunlight and whispered, "Thank you." Then she smiled, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Because now she understood the true secret of kindness. It never ends where it begins. It travels through people, across years, through memories and hands and hearts. It becomes legacy. Ethan carried that legacy onward. He became a teacher, the kind who noticed when a student looked tired, or sad, or invisible. He'd leave small notes on their desks. "You're doing great. You're stronger than you think." He didn't know why it felt sacred, only that it did. One day, a little girl handed him a folded note she'd found on a park bench. It said, "You matter. Keep going." Ethan smiled through tears. The ripple had returned. He framed the note and hung it on his classroom wall. Below it, he wrote in chalk, "The smallest kindness can change the biggest stories." And somewhere beyond the noise of the city, beyond years and distance, the world turned a little gentler. Because kindness doesn't fade. It waits, in gestures, in words, in memories, until someone picks it up again. Then it starts anew. In the end, there were 3 lives changed forever, but countless more touched by their echo. Michael, Sarah, Mr. Chen. 3 ordinary souls bound by one extraordinary truth. Compassion is never wasted. The grocery store light, the coffee aisle, the quiet rain. All of it had been part of something larger, a design too subtle for human eyes,
but unmistakable in its grace. Sarah once wrote, "We never truly know what our smallest moments mean to others." She was right, because sometimes the world shifts not with thunder, but with a whisper, not with fame, but with faith. So if you ever find yourself doubting the power of your kindness, remember this. Someone once smiled because of a stranger who never stayed to be thanked, and that smile carried across generations. Kindness is invisible only to those who stop believing in it. But for those who keep giving, keep hoping, keep choosing grace, it's everywhere. It's in the grocery store lines, in the helping hands of strangers, in the letters tucked into books, in the quiet moments when no one is watching. Because maybe that's what we're here for. Not to be remembered, but to leave behind warmth that outlives us. The world doesn't need heroes with capes or perfect plans. It needs people willing to look at another soul and say, "You're not alone." That's how revolutions begin, softly, invisibly, in the heart. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it, the faint hum of connection, the echo of one unseen act, still rippling through the world. So the next time you have a chance to be kind, take it, even if no one knows, especially if no one knows. Because kindness doesn't need an audience. It just needs a beginning. And maybe, years from now, someone will whisper "thank you" into the air, not knowing your name, not knowing your face, but feeling your light just the same. That's the secret. That's the power. That's the unseen act. Fade out. A quiet world. A single ripple still moving. And somewhere, another story beginning. If you've listened this far, maybe you felt it too. That small stirring inside. That whisper that says, "You can make a difference." Don't ignore it. Answer it. Because you never know whose light might be waiting for you.
One kind gesture. One quiet moment. That's all it takes. The rest? The rest will take care of itself. Kindness doesn't end here. It continues. With you.